At exactly 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima, Japan, experienced a moment that would forever change the course of human history. A single bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, detonated in the sky above this thriving urban center, releasing energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The force of the explosion instantly flattened the city's center, claiming tens of thousands of lives within moments. Streets that had been alive with the bustle of daily activity were transformed into a scene of unimaginable destruction. The skies above the city glowed with a blinding flash, followed by a shockwave so powerful that it shattered windows miles away and toppled buildings as if they were made of paper. Within seconds, the air was filled with flames, debris, and dust, creating a chaotic inferno that consumed everything in its path. Hiroshima, at that time, was a city with a rich history spanning centuries, strategically located on the delta of the Oda River in western Honshu. Known as a military hub and a center of regional administration, it also contained a lively urban population engaged in commerce, education, and cultural pursuits. Yet, despite its relative distance from the front lines of war, the city would become the focal point of a devastating experiment in modern warfare, the first ever use of a nuclear weapon against a civilian population. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima was not merely a military action. It was a signal of a new era, one in which human ingenuity had produced a power so destructive that it could obliterate entire cities in a single instant. The decision to deploy the atomic bomb had been months in the making. The United States, having invested billions of dollars and mobilized tens of thousands of scientists through the Manhattan Project, had developed two types of nuclear weapons: Little Boy, a uranium-based bomb, and Fat Man, a plutonium-based device, represented the culmination of an intense scientific and engineering effort. By mid-1945, Germany had already surrendered, bringing an end to the European theater of World War II, but Japan remained resolute. Military and civilian leaders alike were committed to continuing the fight despite the dire circumstances, and the prospect of a conventional invasion of the Japanese home islands threatened to cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. It was within this context that President Harry S. Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb, aiming to force Japan's surrender and bring an abrupt end to the global conflict. On that August morning, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay carried Little Boy over Hiroshima with a crew fully aware of the gravity of their mission, yet the magnitude of what would unfold was beyond human comprehension. As the plane approached the city, Hiroshima appeared as a calm, seemingly ordinary urban landscape. Schools were filled with children, markets bustled with merchants, and the river reflected the early morning sunlight. Within minutes, the city's life and vibrancy would be obliterated. The detonation occurred approximately 600 meters above the city, a height chosen to maximize the destructive power of the blast. The explosion released an intense burst of heat, radiation, and pressure, equivalent to thousands of conventional bombs detonating simultaneously. The immediate effects were catastrophic. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and flames engulfed the streets. Within a radius of nearly 1 mile, almost nothing remained standing. Tens of thousands of people perished instantly, while countless others were gravely injured. Eyewitness accounts describe individuals vaporized in a flash of heat, while the heat itself left permanent shadow imprints of those who had been standing in the open at the moment of detonation. Survivors, later known as Hibakusha, would recount harrowing experiences of being burned, blinded, or thrown through the air by the shockwave. The horror was compounded by the fact that medical facilities were ill-equipped to handle the magnitude of casualties, and conventional treatments were largely ineffective against injuries caused by the unprecedented radiation exposure. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima was not merely a local tragedy. It sent shockwaves throughout the world. Its effects were felt globally, as the demonstration of nuclear power forced nations to reconsider the scale and ethical implications of modern warfare. The psychological impact on both the Japanese population and the international community was immense. It exposed the terrifying capabilities of atomic energy and served as a grim warning of what humanity could unleash when technological advancement outpaces moral consideration. In telling the story of Hiroshima, it is essential to understand both the scale of the destruction and the human dimension of the tragedy. Tens of thousands of lives were lost in an instant, and survivors faced unimaginable suffering in the days, months, and years that followed. The bombing marked a turning point in history, ending World War II but opening a new chapter in which nuclear weapons would become central to global military strategy, diplomacy, and ethical debate. Today, Hiroshima stands not only as a city rebuilt, but as a living memorial to the resilience of its people and the enduring consequences of choices made in times of war. Its history serves as a testament to the power of human innovation, the fragility of life, and the imperative of remembering the past to inform a more peaceful future. This documentary will take you through the full story of Hiroshima, from its ordinary life before the bombing, through the precise moment of destruction, to the harrowing aftermath, the long-term medical and social consequences, and the lessons that continue to resonate worldwide. By exploring the historical, scientific, and human elements of the atomic bombing, we can gain a deeper understanding of the events that forever changed the world at 8:15 a.m. on that fateful August morning. Before the atomic bomb fell, Hiroshima was a city that thrived on a delicate balance of history, culture, and modern development. Located on the delta of the Oda River in western Honshu, Japan, it had served as a strategic military and administrative center for centuries, with roots tracing back to the 16th century when it became a castle town under the rule of the Mori clan. By the 20th century, Hiroshima had evolved into a bustling urban hub, home to over 350,000 people. It was a city where history and daily life coexisted, where traditional wooden homes lined winding streets alongside factories, schools, and hospitals, and where rivers and bridges carved the landscape into an intricate urban mosaic. The people of Hiroshima lived ordinary lives despite the ongoing global conflict. Students walked to schools filled with lessons in literature, mathematics, and history, while factory workers produced goods and equipment to support Japan's war effort. Merchants opened their shops each morning, selling food, textiles, and household items. Fishermen launched small boats onto the rivers and estuaries, providing fresh fish to local markets, while mothers prepared breakfast for their families and tended to children before sending them off to school. The rhythm of daily life was familiar and predictable, a sense of normalcy maintained in the shadow of a nation at war. Streets were lively, markets were crowded, and public transportation carried thousands of commuters to work, creating a sense of bustling, urban vitality that belied the tragedy that would soon descend. Hiroshima's military significance was also a key factor in its selection as a target for the atomic bomb. The city housed the headquarters of the 2nd General Army of the Imperial Japanese Army and served as a major logistical hub. Factories produced weapons, ammunition, and other war materials, while storage depots and railways connected Hiroshima to the rest of Japan. Although the city's civilian population made up the majority of residents, military installations and industrial centers made it a strategic location in the eyes of U.S. military planners. Hiroshima's flat terrain and wide streets also made it a clear target for a bomb intended to cause maximum devastation, allowing the full effects of the atomic explosion to be measured with devastating efficiency. Despite its industrial and military importance, Hiroshima retained a strong cultural and civic identity. The city was known for its Shinto shrines, Buddhist temples, and parks, where families gathered for leisure, festivals, and seasonal celebrations. Schools emphasized traditional Japanese arts alongside modern education, and the city's libraries, theaters, and cultural centers fostered a sense of intellectual and artistic life. It was a community where everyday experiences, from morning greetings on the street to festivals and school events, formed the fabric of daily life. Residents took pride in their city, its history, and its role as a center of both governance and culture. Life in Hiroshima was also shaped by the realities of wartime Japan. By 1945, the nation had endured nearly 6 years of conflict, with millions of Japanese soldiers and civilians affected by battles across Asia and the Pacific. Food shortages, air raid drills, and the ever-present threat of bombings created an undercurrent of tension, even in cities far from the front lines. Yet in Hiroshima, many residents continued to carry on with daily routines, perhaps in part as a psychological defense against the constant stress of war. Children played in the streets, students attended classes, and families worked to maintain a sense of normalcy, creating a fragile bubble of everyday life within a nation facing impending defeat. Hiroshima's population was diverse, including merchants, factory workers, teachers, soldiers, and civil servants. The city's neighborhoods were closely knit, with communities supporting one another in times of need. Markets bustled with activity, while street vendors sold snacks and goods to passers-by. Children attended morning drills at schools, while adults commuted to work in factories producing textiles, munitions, and equipment for the Japanese army. Religious institutions, including Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples, provided spaces for prayer and reflection, reinforcing a sense of communal identity and resilience amidst the pressures of wartime life. Infrastructure in Hiroshima reflected both its historical roots and modern development. Wooden houses, stone bridges, and cobblestone streets coexisted alongside modern buildings, factories, and rail lines. The city's rivers and canals served as both transportation routes and sources of fresh water, while parks and open spaces offered areas for recreation and leisure. The combination of historical architecture and urban growth gave Hiroshima a distinctive character, a city rooted in centuries of Japanese history, yet adapting to the technological and industrial demands of the 20th century. The sense of normalcy in Hiroshima, however, was fragile. Across Japan, air raids had already caused devastation in other cities, and the threat of aerial bombardment loomed constantly. Residents had become accustomed to air raid drills, blackouts, and the rationing of food and other resources. Yet Hiroshima, spared from major bombings before August 1945, retained an aura of calm that would soon be shattered. Families walked to school unaware that their routines would soon be disrupted as much as and tragically possible. The markets, the riverbanks, the factories, and the neighborhoods, all the familiar sights and sounds of daily life, stood on the precipice of total annihilation. In understanding Hiroshima before the bombing, it is essential to grasp both the ordinary and the extraordinary elements of the city. It was a place where daily life carried on amidst war, where a thriving civilian population coexisted with military and industrial infrastructure, and where cultural, social, and economic activity created a vibrant urban environment. This context of normalcy, of human life going on as it always had, makes the story of Hiroshima all the more striking. It sets the stage for the devastating events of August 6, 1945, and allows us to fully comprehend the scale of the destruction, the human suffering, and the historical significance that followed in the days, months, and decades after the bombing. By the spring of 1945, the Second World War had ravaged much of the globe for 6 relentless years. Europe had already seen the surrender of Nazi Germany in May, but the war in the Pacific continued with brutal intensity. Japan, though increasingly weakened, showed no signs of capitulation. Allied forces had captured Okinawa in June after one of the bloodiest battles of the war and planning for an invasion of Japan's home islands, codenamed Operation Downfall, was underway. Military analysts projected staggering casualties for both sides, estimating that hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers and potentially millions of Japanese civilians and military personnel could die in a protracted invasion. The stakes were immense, and both the American public and military leaders were desperate for a swift resolution. Against this backdrop, the United States had already invested heavily in the Manhattan Project, a secret research and development initiative that had begun in 1942. This top-secret project, involving the combined efforts of brilliant scientists, engineers, and military strategists, aimed to harness the unprecedented power of nuclear fission. By mid-1945, the project had produced 2 types of atomic bombs: a uranium-based bomb, codenamed Little Boy, and a plutonium-based bomb, codenamed Fat Man. The existence of these weapons remained classified, and only the highest levels of government were aware of their destructive potential. President Harry S. Truman, who had assumed office after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death in April 1945, faced one of the most consequential decisions of his presidency: whether to authorize the use of an entirely new form of weaponry that could alter the course of human history. The deliberations surrounding the atomic bomb were multifaceted, involving military, scientific, and political considerations. Military leaders argued that using the bomb could prevent an invasion of Japan, saving countless Allied lives. They emphasized that Japan had shown no intention of surrendering unconditionally, despite facing crippling losses in resources, territory, and infrastructure. Advisors pointed to intelligence reports indicating that the Japanese population and military were prepared to fight to the last man, with civilian militias being trained to resist occupation. In this context, the atomic bomb was seen as a means to force Japan's surrender without subjecting Allied forces to a potentially catastrophic invasion. On the scientific front, the Manhattan Project scientists themselves had differing opinions. While many understood the bomb's enormous destructive potential and its ability to end the war quickly, some expressed concerns about the ethical implications of targeting civilians. Letters and reports from physicists such as Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein, who had earlier warned of the dangers of nuclear weapons, urged caution and proposed alternative demonstrations of the bomb's power, such as detonating it on an uninhabited island to persuade Japan to surrender. However, the urgency of ending the war and the desire to maintain American strategic advantage in the post-war world largely outweighed these ethical arguments. In addition to military and ethical considerations, political factors influenced the decision. The United States wanted to assert its dominance in the post-war global order, particularly in relation to the Soviet Union, which had declared war on Japan only days before the Hiroshima bombing. American policymakers viewed the atomic bomb as not only a tool to end the war swiftly, but also a geopolitical instrument to demonstrate the country's technological and military supremacy. The bomb would send a signal to the world about the United States' capability to wield unprecedented destructive power, shaping the balance of power in the years to come. Hiroshima was selected as the target for multiple reasons. The city had significant military and industrial installations, but had been largely untouched by conventional bombing, allowing observers to measure the bomb's effects more accurately. Its relatively flat terrain and dense urban center made it an ideal location for maximizing the blast radius and destruction. Nearby rivers would also help minimize the dispersion of fires, allowing the true impact of the atomic blast to be assessed. Intelligence reports had carefully studied potential targets. including Kakura and Niigata, but Hiroshima's combination of military importance and urban structure ultimately made it the preferred choice. On July 25, 1945, President Truman gave the official authorization for the use of the atomic bomb against Japan, marking a historic and irrevocable decision. Military planners began preparing the logistics of delivery, including selecting the Enola Gay, a B-29 bomber piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, to carry out the mission. Crews trained extensively, practicing the precise altitude, speed, and trajectory needed to maximize the bomb's destructive effect. Every detail was meticulously calculated, from the bomb's detonation height of approximately 600 meters above the city to the timing required to achieve the desired blast radius. The decision to drop the atomic bomb was not taken lightly. It reflected a complex intersection of military strategy, scientific innovation, and political calculation. At its core, it was a decision born from the pressures of total war, a desire to end global conflict swiftly, and a recognition of the unprecedented destructive power now in human hands. Historians have debated the morality and necessity of this action for decades, yet there is no denying that it would forever alter the trajectory of warfare, international relations, and humanity's understanding of its own capacity for destruction. As preparations were finalized, Hiroshima continued its ordinary rhythm of life, unaware of the catastrophe that was about to strike. Students attended classes, shopkeepers opened their stalls, and families carried on with their daily routines. The city, vibrant and resilient, stood on the brink of annihilation, its fate sealed by a single, fateful decision made thousands of miles away. The choices taken in Washington and the laboratories of the Manhattan Project would culminate in a moment that would mark the beginning of the nuclear age and forever imprint Hiroshima onto the pages of history. The morning of August 6, 1945, began like any other in Hiroshima. Residents awoke to the gentle hum of a city preparing for the day. Schoolchildren walked along quiet streets. Vendors opened their stalls. Factory workers commuted to their jobs, and families prepared breakfast in modest wooden homes. The city's rivers shimmered in the early morning sunlight. Bridges arched gracefully over the water, and temples and shrines echoed with the occasional bells of worship. Yet, beneath this ordinary calm, a momentous event was about to unfold that would change the world forever. At approximately 2:45 a.m. at Hiroshima time, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island, carrying a weapon that had never been used in combat before. Little Boy, a uranium-based atomic bomb. The crew of the Enola Gay, led by Colonel Paul Tibbets, had trained for weeks, meticulously rehearsing flight paths, bomb release procedures, and altitude calculations. The goal was to detonate the bomb at an altitude that would maximize destruction around 600 meters above the city. The flight itself was uneventful, but the tension aboard the aircraft was palpable, with every crew member aware that history would be made that morning. As the plane approached Hiroshima, the city lay in deceptive tranquility. Unlike Tokyo and other Japanese cities that had already suffered conventional bombings, Hiroshima had remained largely intact, making it an ideal target for the U.S. military to measure the bomb's destructive power. The crew could see the sprawling city below, its streets and river networks forming a patchwork of life that would soon vanish in an instant. At precisely 8:15 a.m., Little Boy was released from the bomb bay, and within seconds, it detonated above the city. The explosion produced a blinding flash of light, brighter than the sun at midday, instantly visible for miles around. Within seconds, Hiroshima was transformed into a scene of utter devastation. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, leaving nothing but rubble and twisted metal. Bridges collapsed into the river, factories and schools disintegrated, and firestorms spread rapidly across the city. Eyewitnesses reported that the streets were filled with debris, ash, and smoke, and that the intense heat had burned the skin off exposed flesh and even caused shadows of people standing in the open to be permanently imprinted on walls and pavements. Survivors recalled the sky turning a horrifying orange as smoke and debris filled the air, making it nearly impossible to see or breathe. The blast killed tens of thousands of people instantly, with estimates ranging from 70,000 to 80,000 casualties within the first few moments. Many of these victims were vaporized by the extreme heat, while others were crushed beneath collapsing buildings. Fires ignited simultaneously throughout the city, consuming wooden homes and businesses, while the force of the shockwave sent heavy debris hurtling through the streets, causing additional injuries and fatalities. Hospitals and emergency services were immediately overwhelmed, unable to cope with the scale and intensity of the disaster. The sheer magnitude of destruction was unprecedented, and the human suffering unimaginable. Radiation, invisible but lethal, began its silent work as the initial blast subsided. Those who survived the immediate explosion were now at the mercy of an insidious enemy, ionizing radiation, which would manifest over hours, days, and weeks. Early symptoms included nausea, vomiting, and severe fatigue, followed by hair loss, bleeding, and fever. Medical professionals, unprepared for the scale and nature of radiation injuries, struggled to treat the wounded. Conventional methods, such as bandages and splints, proved largely ineffective against burns, internal injuries, and radiation-induced sickness. The city's already limited medical infrastructure was entirely incapacitated, leaving survivors with little to no care. Eyewitness accounts provide a harrowing window into the human cost of the bombing. One survivor described seeing friends and neighbors disappear in a flash of light, while another recounted wandering through streets filled with the moans and cries of the injured, unable to reach anyone in need. Children were torn from their families were separated, and countless bodies remained trapped beneath collapsed buildings. The psychological trauma added another layer to the catastrophe, as survivors struggled to comprehend the sudden and total annihilation of the city they had known all their lives. The detonation of Little Boy over Hiroshima was not only a military operation, but also an event that fundamentally altered human history. It demonstrated the terrifying, destructive capacity of nuclear weapons and marked the first time in history that a human population had been targeted with such power. In the hours and days that followed, the full scale of the catastrophe would become apparent, with tens of thousands more succumbing to injuries and radiation sickness. The bombing left Hiroshima a charred and unrecognizable wasteland, a testament to both the precision of the weapon and the tragic vulnerability of urban populations in the age of nuclear warfare. In examining the events of August 6, 1945, it becomes clear that the bombing of Hiroshima was a turning point in world history. It ended an era of conventional warfare while inaugurating the nuclear age, forcing nations to confront the moral, ethical, and political implications of weapons capable of annihilating entire cities in a single moment. The detonation above Hiroshima was not just a military strike. It was a historical event that reshaped the geopolitical landscape, influenced Japan's surrender, and left a lasting legacy on generations to come. The city, its people, and the world would never be the same again. The moment Little Boy detonated above Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the city was transformed from a vibrant urban center into a scene of unimaginable devastation. Within seconds, the combination of a blinding flash, a searing heat wave, and a shockwave traveling at supersonic speed obliterated everything in the immediate vicinity. Estimates suggest that 70,000 to 80,000 people perished instantly, a staggering proportion of the city's 350,000 residents. Entire families vanished, streets disappeared beneath rubble, and the familiar structures of homes, schools, and businesses disintegrated in the conflagration. The scale of destruction was unparalleled in human history, and it left survivors in a state of shock, wandering amid the ruins in search of loved ones. The physical force of the blast was catastrophic. Buildings, many constructed from wood and paper as was typical in Japanese cities of the era, were completely destroyed, while more modern concrete structures collapsed or were severely damaged. Streets were littered with splintered timber, twisted metal, and shattered glass. Vehicles were overturned, and bridges buckled under the force of the explosion. Those who were outside or near windows at the time of detonation were instantly struck by flying debris, with injuries ranging from broken bones to severe lacerations. The thermal radiation released by the bomb caused immediate and severe burns, igniting clothing and, in many cases, human flesh itself. Eyewitnesses later described seeing bodies engulfed in flames or vaporized in the heat of the explosion. A haunting and unique phenomenon occurred as a result of the intense thermal radiation, the creation of human shadows permanently etched into walls, sidewalks, and surfaces. These shadows, left behind by people who had been standing in the path of the light, became one of the most poignant and disturbing symbols of the bombing. They marked the precise moment of death, frozen in time by the searing energy of the blast. Countless shadows of men, women, and children remain in Hiroshima to this day, serving as an enduring reminder of the human lives instantly erased by the atomic bomb. Survivors, known as Hibakusha, experienced chaos and terror in the immediate aftermath. Many were blinded by the initial flash, while others were trapped under rubble or unable to move due to severe injuries. Those who survived the initial blast faced intense heat, fires, and collapsing buildings as they attempted to flee the city. Streets became impassable, rivers and canals were clogged with debris, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the ruined cityscape. Eyewitness accounts describe the desperate attempts of survivors to find family members, often carrying the injured or attempting to escape infernos spreading uncontrollably through wooden neighborhoods. The human suffering was compounded by the collapse of basic infrastructure. Water lines were destroyed, making it nearly impossible to extinguish fires or provide for the injured. Medical facilities were obliterated or overcrowded beyond capacity. Hospitals and clinics, where doctors and nurses were themselves injured or killed, could not accommodate the overwhelming number of victims. Patients who arrived at surviving medical centers faced extreme shortages of supplies, from bandages to anesthesia, and were treated in improvised spaces with minimal equipment. The wounds inflicted by the atomic bomb burns, broken bones, internal injuries, and acute radiation effects were beyond the scope of conventional medical treatment. In the hours following the blast, the death toll continued to rise. People who had initially survived the explosion succumbed to injuries or radiation sickness, which caused fever, bleeding, hair loss, and profound weakness. The psychological trauma added another dimension to the catastrophe, as survivors witnessed the complete annihilation of their community, the loss of family and friends, and the overwhelming scale of destruction. Many wandered aimlessly through streets filled with ash, smoke, and the stench of burning flesh and buildings, unable to comprehend the sudden reversal of life into death and chaos. Fires, ignited by the heat of the explosion and electrical sparks, spread rapidly throughout Hiroshima. The city's wooden construction and narrow streets allowed flames to leap from building to building, forming a firestorm in the urban center. Wind currents generated by the blast accelerated the spread of fire, trapping survivors in isolated pockets and consuming entire neighborhoods. Attempts to flee the city were hindered by collapsing infrastructure, rivers clogged with debris, and roads choked with panicked people. Rescue efforts were nearly impossible, as the city's firefighters and emergency personnel were decimated in the initial blast, leaving ordinary citizens to improvise as best they could. The social and emotional chaos was profound. Families were separated in the panic, with children lost and parents searching desperately for their loved ones. Some survivors reported witnessing loved ones disintegrated or burned beyond recognition, while others found themselves suddenly alone in a landscape of ruin. Communities that had functioned as cohesive social units for decades were shattered, leaving only the echoes of voices calling out amid the debris. The randomness of survival created additional layers of trauma, as individuals who escaped one danger were often confronted by another. Radiation exposure, fire, injury, or starvation in the hours and days that followed. In examining the immediate aftermath of the Hiroshima bombing, it becomes clear that the atomic bomb did not merely destroy buildings and infrastructure. It obliterated the social, emotional, and physical fabric of the city. Tens of thousands of lives were extinguished in an instant, and those who survived were confronted with unimaginable suffering. The combination of blast, heat, and radiation created a level of destruction that had never before been witnessed in human history. Hiroshima had been transformed into a scene of horror, a living testament to the devastating potential of nuclear weapons, and a stark warning of the consequences of wielding such unprecedented. In the hours, days, and weeks following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, the city's survivors faced a horror that extended far beyond the initial blast. While tens of thousands had been killed instantly, the true scope of the catastrophe unfolded as radiation, injuries, fires, and social collapse compounded the devastation. By the end of the year, the death toll would rise to nearly 140,000, with additional casualties from lingering radiation effects continuing for years. The human, medical, and social aftermath of the bombing made Hiroshima not only a site of destruction, but a laboratory for understanding the unprecedented consequences of nuclear warfare. Immediately after the explosion, the city was engulfed in chaos. Fires, ignited by the bomb's intense heat, raged uncontrollably through wooden neighborhoods and factories, consuming structures that had survived the blast. Streets were filled with rubble, ash, and the bodies of victims, while rivers and canals, once sources of life and commerce, became barriers to movement as debris clogged their channels. Survivors, often severely burned or injured, stumbled through the streets in search of safety, clean water, and loved ones. With hospitals destroyed or overwhelmed, the injured were left largely without care. Makeshift first aid was administered by anyone available, yet the scale of destruction meant that survival often depended on luck as much as resilience. Radiation sickness became a silent and deadly enemy. Unlike conventional injuries, its effects were invisible in the immediate aftermath, appearing hours or days later. Early symptoms included nausea, vomiting, fatigue, and diarrhea, often accompanied by high fever. Within days, survivors experienced hair loss, bleeding from the gums or nose, and skin lesions caused by internal and external radiation exposure. The immune system of many victims collapsed, leaving them vulnerable to infection. Doctors in Hiroshima, who had trained for conventional injuries, were ill-equipped to handle the complex effects of nuclear radiation. Standard treatments such as bandages, antibiotics, and blood transfusions were often ineffective or unavailable, as medical supplies had been destroyed or overwhelmed by the sheer number of patients. Hospitals faced catastrophic shortages of resources. Doctors and nurses struggled to care for thousands of patients simultaneously, often improvising in damaged buildings or open-air spaces. Patients were treated on mats on the floor, in corridors, or beneath makeshift tents. Those with burns were given minimal care, infection was rampant, and pain relief was almost non-existent. Many medical personnel themselves suffered from radiation exposure, further limiting the capacity to treat the wounded. The combination of physical injuries, radiation sickness, and psychological trauma created a crisis unlike anything humanity had previously encountered. Beyond the immediate medical consequences, the social fabric of Hiroshima unraveled. Families were torn apart by death and displacement. Survivors wandered the streets in search of loved ones, often finding nothing but destruction. Children were orphaned, parents lost, and communities disbanded. Public services, already limited in wartime Japan, collapsed entirely. Water and food supplies were disrupted, sanitation systems failed, and transportation networks were destroyed. Survivors faced the double burden of caring for the injured while struggling to secure the necessities of life. The city's infrastructure, which had supported a thriving population before the bombing, was rendered almost entirely non-functional. Psychological trauma was profound and widespread. Survivors reported nightmares, paralysis, anxiety, and survivor's guilt. Many described the indescribable horror of witnessing friends, family, and neighbors vaporized or burned beyond recognition. The destruction of familiar landmarks, neighborhoods, and cultural sites compounded the emotional devastation, leaving a city that was not only physically destroyed but psychologically scarred. Social cohesion, which had once bound communities together, was fractured, leaving people isolated and vulnerable in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe. Medical documentation from Hiroshima provides a harrowing glimpse into the human toll. Autopsies revealed the catastrophic internal effects of radiation, including massive organ damage, destruction of bone marrow, and cellular mutations. Researchers noted that some victims appeared to suffer slow, progressive symptoms of illness that would eventually lead to death. Over time, the city became a focus of international medical study, as physicians and scientists sought to understand the long-term health consequences of exposure to nuclear radiation. The Hibakusha, survivors of the bombing, became living testimonies to the effects of nuclear weapons, their health struggles providing crucial insight for both medical and historical study. The aftermath also exposed the inadequacy of conventional disaster response in dealing with nuclear devastation. Relief efforts were limited, with the Japanese government struggling to coordinate aid amid the overwhelming destruction. International attention, particularly from the United States and the Allied powers, focused initially on the military and political significance of the bombing, while survivors received little immediate support. It would take years for the reconstruction of Hiroshima and the provision of sustained medical care to restore even a semblance of normal life to the city. Despite the overwhelming suffering, Hiroshima's survivors demonstrated remarkable resilience. Communities slowly reorganized, hospitals were rebuilt, and survivors worked to care for the injured and rebuild their lives. Humanitarian efforts, both domestic and international, gradually improved access to medical care, food, and shelter. Over time, survivors began to share their experiences, creating a collective memory of the bombing that would serve as both a warning and a lesson for future generations. Their testimonies, chronicled in books, films, and museum exhibits, provide an intimate perspective on the human consequences of nuclear warfare. The aftermath of Hiroshima was a stark demonstration of the destructive power of nuclear weapons. It was not merely the immediate casualties that defined the tragedy, but the lingering effects of radiation, injury, psychological trauma, and societal collapse. The city became a testament to human suffering on an unprecedented scale, illustrating both the physical and moral implications of using atomic weaponry. In understanding the medical crisis and the human toll, we gain insight into the profound consequences of technological advancement untempered by ethical considerations, a lesson that continues to resonate across generations and nations. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, marked the beginning of a chain of events that would bring World War II to an abrupt and decisive conclusion. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, was detonated over Nagasaki, a city also of strategic military and industrial importance. These unprecedented strikes demonstrated the devastating power of nuclear weapons and exerted extraordinary pressure on Japan's leadership, forcing a reconsideration of the nation's position in the conflict. For the Japanese government, the choice was stark: continue a war that could result in the complete annihilation of the homeland or surrender unconditionally to the Allied powers. Before the bombings, Japan's military and civilian leaders were deeply divided. Some advocated for continued resistance, hoping to negotiate more favorable surrender terms and preserve elements of the nation's sovereignty, while others recognized the inevitability of defeat and the futility of further combat. The devastation wrought on Hiroshima, coupled with the prospect of additional atomic strikes, accelerated the decision-making process. Estimates suggested that further bombings could obliterate major population centers across Japan, and the threat of a full-scale invasion of the Japanese home islands loomed. Operation Downfall, the planned Allied invasion, was projected to cause massive casualties on both sides, with some estimates predicting as many as 1 million Japanese deaths and hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers killed or wounded. The scale of destruction in Hiroshima made these projections even more terrifying. In the days following the bombings, Japan's Emperor Hirohito took the unprecedented step of intervening in government deliberations, urging surrender to prevent further destruction and loss of life. On August 15, 1945, he announced Japan's acceptance of the Allied terms outlined in the Potsdam Declaration. In his radio broadcast, a historical first for the Japanese people, Hirohito acknowledged the catastrophic power of a new and most cruel bomb and emphasized the need to preserve the nation and prevent the complete annihilation of the population. This surrender marked the formal end of World War II, bringing 6 years of global conflict to a close and setting the stage for a new geopolitical landscape. The immediate consequences for Japan were profound. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure was decimated, and millions of people faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives amid scarcity, illness, and psychological trauma. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of the devastating human cost of modern warfare, while survivors, the Hibakusha, bore the lasting effects of radiation exposure and injury. Beyond the physical devastation, the bombings imposed a moral and ethical reckoning on the Japanese people, as the nation confronted both the horrors of war and the unprecedented destructiveness of nuclear technology. Globally, the atomic bombings reshaped geopolitics and military strategy in ways that reverberated throughout the 20th century. For the United States, the bombings demonstrated the effectiveness of nuclear weapons as a tool for ending war and establishing military dominance. At the same time, they sparked intense ethical debates about the morality of targeting civilian populations and the broader implications of wielding such destructive power. Allied nations and neutral observers alike grappled with the implications of nuclear warfare, questioning how humanity could reconcile scientific advancement with the capacity for mass destruction. The use of the atomic bomb also profoundly influenced the emerging post-war world order. The devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki signaled the beginning of the nuclear age, prompting nations to reconsider military strategy, arms development, and international diplomacy. The presence of atomic weapons became a central factor in global politics, contributing to the onset of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Nations around the world recognized the potential for nuclear weapons to alter the balance of power, leading to the development of treaties, policies, and containment strategy. Ethical and philosophical debates surrounding the bombings emerged almost immediately. Historians, politicians, scientists, and ordinary citizens questioned whether Japan could have been persuaded to surrender without resorting to nuclear attacks, or whether the bombings were justified as a means to end the war swiftly. The discussion continues to this day, reflecting the enduring moral complexities of nuclear weapons. While the bombings undeniably contributed to the conclusion of World War II, they also set a precedent for the use of technology with the capacity to annihilate entire populations, raising questions about responsibility, accountability, and the limits of wartime conduct. In addition to their strategic and ethical consequences, the bombings had profound cultural and psychological impacts worldwide. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became icons of human suffering and resilience, inspiring literature, art, film, and activism focused on peace, disarmament, and the prevention of future nuclear catastrophes. The experiences of the Hibakusha, documented through interviews, memoirs, and photographic evidence, became central to efforts to educate the public about the realities of nuclear warfare. The bombings served as both a warning and a lesson, highlighting the unprecedented consequences of technological advancement when combined with human conflict. The surrender of Japan also initiated a series of transformations in the international system. Occupation and reconstruction efforts led by the United States and Allied powers reshaped Japan's political, economic, and social institutions. The country adopted a pacifist constitution, demilitarized its armed forces, and embraced democratic governance. These reforms, influenced in part by the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, facilitated Japan's emergence as a modern, peaceful nation, while the global community grappled with the challenge of preventing future nuclear warfare. Ultimately, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced humanity to confront the terrifying potential of modern technology. They ended a global conflict that had claimed tens of millions of lives, but at a cost that was staggering in its immediacy and long-term consequences. The surrender of Japan marked not just the end of World War II, but the beginning of a new era, one defined by nuclear power, ethical responsibility, and the imperative to prevent the recurrence of such devastation. Hiroshima, once a thriving city, became both a symbol of human vulnerability and a testament to resilience, reminding the world of the profound consequences that follow when warfare and technology collide on an unprecedented scale. Today, Hiroshima stands as a testament to resilience, recovery, and the enduring human spirit. From the ashes of the city's destruction on August 6, 1945, a metropolis has emerged that balances remembrance with renewal. Once reduced to rubble, Hiroshima has been meticulously rebuilt, becoming a vibrant urban center while preserving the memory of those lost to the atomic bomb. Modern Hiroshima is home to over 1 million residents and has regained its position as a hub of commerce, culture, and education. Yet the scars of its past remain visible not only in monuments and museums, but also in the stories passed down through generations. At the heart of the city lies the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, established in 1954 on the site of the city's former center, Ground Zero. The park serves as both a physical and symbolic reminder of the tragedy, encompassing museums, memorials, monuments, and open spaces dedicated to reflection and education. Central to the park is the atomic bomb dome, the skeletal remains of the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, which survived the blast. Its charred, twisted structure stands as a haunting symbol of the bomb's destructive power, preserved exactly as it was in 1945. The dome, along with other memorials, conveys the scale of loss while urging visitors to contemplate the consequences of nuclear warfare. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum provides an in-depth and often heart-wrenching account of the bombing, combining photographs, artifacts, and personal testimonies of survivors. Exhibits detail the experiences of the Hibakusha, including the immediate impact of the blast, the injuries sustained, and the long-term effects of radiation exposure. Visitors can see charred clothing, household items, and personal belongings frozen in time, humanizing the scale of destruction. The museum also educates about the historical context, the development and deployment of the atomic bomb, and the global implications of nuclear weapons. By presenting these stories and artifacts, the museum fosters empathy and a profound understanding of the human cost of war. Hiroshima's reconstruction was a monumental effort. The city's leaders, along with national and international support, worked to rebuild infrastructure, homes, and public services while promoting peace and education. Modern urban planning transformed Hiroshima into a city that is both functional and commemorative. Wide boulevards, green spaces, and well-planned neighborhoods coexist with schools, hospitals, and commercial districts. While the city has embraced modernization, efforts have been made to retain historical memory, ensuring that the lessons of 1945 remain an integral part of the urban landscape. The survivors of Hiroshima, known as the Hibakusha, have played a central role in keeping the memory of the tragedy alive. Their testimonies, whether in interviews, books, or public speeches, offer intimate insights into the human experience of the bombing. Many Hibakusha became advocates for nuclear disarmament and global peace, traveling internationally to share their stories. Their efforts have inspired generations to consider the ethical, moral, and social consequences of nuclear weapons. As time passes and the number of living Hibakusha decreases, documenting their accounts remains a crucial endeavor for historians, educators, and peace advocates alike. Cultural remembrance is also woven into Hiroshima's identity. Annual observances, particularly on August 6th, draw thousands of citizens and visitors to Peace Memorial Park for moments of silence, speeches, and ceremonial releases of lanterns on the Motoyasu River. Schools incorporate peace education into curricula, ensuring that younger generations understand the historical events and ethical questions surrounding nuclear warfare. Local artists, writers, and filmmakers have contributed to a rich body of work reflecting on Hiroshima, blending memory, testimony, and reflection in ways that resonate across borders and cultures. Hiroshima today also embodies hope and resilience. Despite its history of unparalleled destruction, the city thrives economically and socially. Educational institutions, research centers, and technological industries have flourished, contributing to Japan's broader development. Parks, rivers, and green spaces have been restored, providing both recreational opportunities and symbolic renewal. Citizens actively promote international dialogue, hosting conferences, cultural exchanges, and peace initiatives that position Hiroshima as a global ambassador for nonviolence. The city's story demonstrates that recovery is possible even after unimaginable tragedy, offering lessons in perseverance, reconstruction, and the importance of civic and moral responsibility. Internationally, Hiroshima has become a symbol of the anti-nuclear movement. Its memorials and museums are not only tourist destinations, but also centers for advocacy, education, and reflection. Global leaders and dignitaries frequently visit to pay respects and reinforce commitments to peace. Educational programs bring students from around the world to Hiroshima, immersing them in history while challenging them to consider the ethical dimensions of modern warfare. In doing so, Hiroshima serves as a living classroom, teaching the world about the consequences of conflict, the value of human life, and the urgent necessity of preventing future nuclear devastation. In balancing memory with life, Hiroshima has transformed tragedy into a message of hope. The city's physical and cultural reconstruction, coupled with the voices of survivors and the dedication to global peace, ensures that Hiroshima is more than a historical footnote. It is a living reminder of the cost of war and the resilience of humanity. By integrating education, remembrance, and advocacy, Hiroshima continues to inspire reflection, dialogue, and action, reminding the world that peace must be actively preserved. Through its museums, monuments, and memorials, through its survivors' testimonies, and through the thriving life of its citizens, Hiroshima stands as both a memorial to the past and a beacon for the future. The city embodies a profound lesson. Humanity can endure, rebuild, and educate, even in the shadow of destruction, ensuring that the horrors of August 6, 1945, are never forgotten. Hiroshima is more than a historical event. It is a story that encompasses tragedy, survival, and the enduring capacity for hope and resilience. The events of August 6, 1945, changed the course of human history, leaving an indelible mark not only on the city itself, but on the entire world. As we conclude this documentary, it is important to reflect on the broader implications of the atomic bombing, the lessons it offers, and the responsibility of each generation to learn from history to prevent future atrocities. Hiroshima serves as a powerful reminder that the decisions of a few can ripple outward to affect countless lives, shaping the moral, political, and technological landscape of the world. The city that rose from the ashes of devastation is a testament to human resilience. Hiroshima's reconstruction involved enormous efforts from survivors, local authorities, and international aid, transforming a landscape of ruin into a thriving metropolis. Today, Hiroshima is home to over 1 million residents and functions as a center of education, culture, and commerce. But its modernity is intertwined with a profound sense of remembrance. Memorials, museums, and public spaces honor the victims and educate new generations about the consequences of nuclear warfare. These spaces provide more than historical documentation. They are instruments of collective memory, fostering empathy, reflection, and moral awareness among visitors from across the globe. Central to Hiroshima's identity are the Hibakusha, the survivors who lived through the atomic bombing. Their testimonies, experiences, and advocacy have been instrumental in shaping the global narrative around nuclear weapons. Through personal stories, they convey the physical pain, psychological trauma, and societal challenges caused by the bomb, ensuring that the world understands the true human cost of nuclear warfare. Many Hibakusha have dedicated their lives to promoting peace and disarmament, traveling internationally to speak at conferences, schools, and public forums. Their voices underscore the importance of remembering the past to guide present and future actions, emphasizing that history's lessons remain relevant across generations. Hiroshima's story also emphasizes the ethical dimensions of scientific advancement and military power. The atomic bomb, a product of unprecedented technological innovation, demonstrated that human knowledge can be wielded for destruction on an unimaginable scale. The city's experience reminds us that ethical considerations must accompany scientific progress. Today, as emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and nuclear energy continue to transform society, Hiroshima stands as a moral reference point. It challenges us to ask, how should humanity balance innovation with responsibility? And what safeguards are necessary to prevent catastrophe when power exceeds moral oversight? Education plays a central role in ensuring that Hiroshima's legacy endures. Schools, universities, and cultural institutions integrate the history of the atomic bombing into curricula, not merely as a recounting of events, but as an exploration of moral, ethical, and social questions. Annual commemorations, particularly the observance on August 6th, draw students, citizens, and international visitors to Peace Memorial Park, where moments of silence, speeches, and ceremonial acts reinforce the importance of reflection and empathy. Through these practices, Hiroshima teaches that remembering is not passive. It is an active commitment to understanding history, honoring those affected, and shaping a more conscientious world. Hiroshima's memorials and museums serve as both education centers and symbols of advocacy. The atomic bomb dome, preserved exactly as it stood after the blast, communicates the horror of nuclear destruction without words, while exhibits in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum provide factual, humanized accounts of the bombing's impact. Visitors encounter personal items, photographs, and testimonies that humanize statistics, making the scale of suffering tangible. These memorials emphasize that understanding the past requires not only knowledge, but empathy, the capacity to see beyond numbers to the lived experiences of those affected. The story of Hiroshima extends beyond memory. It is also a call to action. By studying the city's history, engaging with the experiences of survivors, and participating in educational initiatives, individuals contribute to a global movement dedicated to peace, conflict prevention, and the elimination of nuclear threats. The lessons of Hiroshima are timeless. Unchecked technological power can lead to catastrophe. Moral responsibility is inseparable from decision-making, and peace requires vigilance, advocacy, and cooperation across borders. Every act of education, remembrance, or advocacy strengthens humanity's collective ability to prevent future tragedies of similar magnitude. As we reflect on Hiroshima, it is essential to recognize that history is not merely a record of the past. It is a guide for the present and the future. Remembering Hiroshima honors the tens of thousands who perished instantly and the countless others who suffered in the aftermath. It underscores the importance of empathy and leadership, caution in the application of technology, and dedication to conflict resolution through peaceful means. By learning from Hiroshima, society is better equipped to confront ethical dilemmas, prevent large-scale suffering, and foster a culture that values life and human dignity above the allure of destructive power. In conclusion, Hiroshima is a story of devastation and hope intertwined. It challenges humanity to confront uncomfortable truths, to remember the consequences of choices made in moments of war, and to act with foresight and compassion. By preserving the memory of Hiroshima and sharing its lessons, we honor those who lived and died, uphold the moral imperative of peace, and commit to a world where such destruction is never repeated. If this documentary has expanded your understanding of Hiroshima, consider subscribing for more historical deep dives, sharing these insights with others, and engaging in discussions about the ethical and societal implications of war and technology. By doing so, you become part of a collective effort to ensure that the story of Hiroshima, its victims, and its enduring lessons remain a guiding force for generations to come. Remembering Hiroshima is not just an act of history, it is a commitment to humanity, responsibility, and peace.